I spent 31 years as a social worker, and the one thing that job taught me, the thing it carved into my bones, is that you never panic when it matters most. You breathe, you observe, you act. I never thought I would need that training to save my own daughter. Her name is Bridget. She was 28 when she met him. I remember the exact evening she called me. It was a Tuesday in late October, the kind of night where the wind off Lake Ontario cuts right through your coat, no matter how well you've bundled up. And I was in the kitchen making tea, and she called, and her voice had that breathless quality to it. That particular lightness I hadn't heard since she was a teenager and she'd made the volleyball team. "Mom," she said, "I met someone." His name was Spencer. No? Wait. I'm getting ahead of myself. That name was Theodore. Theo. She always called him Theo. He was 34. He worked in commercial real estate in downtown Toronto, leasing office space to corporations. The kind of work that pays well and sounds important at dinner parties without requiring much explanation. When I met him the first time at a restaurant on Queen Street West, one of those places where the menu doesn't have prices on it, and you're expected not to care. He stood up when I walked in. He pulled out my chair. He asked me about my career with what seemed like genuine curiosity, leaning slightly forward, nodding at the right moments. He told me I had clearly raised an exceptional woman. I liked him. That's the part I have to sit with. I genuinely liked him. Bridget had always been careful with herself. She wasn't reckless the way some young women are, jumping into things with both feet and no looking. She'd had 2 serious relationships before Theo, and she'd ended both of them sensibly, without drama, because she said they weren't quite, and she could tell early on. So when she fell for this man, when she fell hard, which I could see she had, I thought, she knows what she's doing. She chose well. I told myself that for almost 2 years. The first thing I noticed was small. So small I filed it away without even consciously registering it. We were at my house for Sunday dinner. This would have been maybe 7 or 8 months after they started dating. And Bridget had made her grandmother's butter chicken, which she'd been making since she was 19, a recipe she knew by heart. She set the pot on the table, and Theo looked at it and said, pleasantly, "You know, the version at that place on Bloor is a bit more balanced. Less cream." He smiled when he said it, completely warm smile, and Bridget said, "Oh, I know, I can adjust it next time," and she laughed a little. It was nothing. People have opinions about food. But I noticed that she didn't take a second serving. She used to always take a second serving of that dish. They got engaged 14 months later. A winter proposal at the distillery district with the Christmas lights still up. She texted me a photo of the ring at 11 o'clock at night, and I cried in the good way, the way that surprises you, tears that just appear before you've decided to feel anything. The wedding was the following September. 68 guests, a venue north of the city near Barrie, rented farmhouse property with a barn that they'd strung with Edison lights. It was genuinely beautiful. Theo's parents flew in from Calgary. His mother, I'll call her what she was, which is a woman who had decided long before she arrived that she was the most important person in any room. She wore a cream-colored dress to the wedding. Not white exactly, but close enough that several people mentioned it afterward. I noticed. I said nothing. That's also something I have to sit with. The first year of their marriage was fine on the surface. They bought a condo in Etobicoke. Bridget kept her job as a program coordinator at a non-profit in the West End. She'd been there 4 years. She was good at it. She cared about the work. Theo earned more and was apparently not quiet about that fact, but lots of people are financially competitive and it doesn't make them dangerous. I was watching. I thought I was watching carefully. I told myself everything was okay because she still called me twice a week and she still laughed on the phone. What I didn't know was what happened after she hung up. She told me later, much later, after everything, that those phone calls with me were the thing she planned her days around, that she would sometimes sit in the car in the parking garage for 20 minutes after work before going upstairs because she needed that little pocket of time that was just hers. That Theo had, over the course of that first year, begun to have opinions about who she spent her time with and how long and why. Not angry opinions, not shouted ultimatums, just questions, quiet, measured, reasonable-sounding questions. Did you really need to stay that long? You seem drained after you see her. Have you noticed that? I just worry she makes you anxious. I say that because I love you. I say that. Abusers rarely start with the fist. That's the thing most people don't understand until they've either lived it or spent 3 decades watching it happen to other people's children. It starts with the voice, with the slow, patient work of making someone doubt the accuracy of their own perceptions. By the time Bridget had been married 18 months, she was apologizing for things she hadn't done wrong. She was checking her phone differently. That particular vigilance, the way a person holds a device when they're expecting the message behind the message. She started wearing her hair differently, pulled back and neater, and when I asked her about it, she said Theo preferred it that way. She said it like it was a perfectly ordinary thing to say. I should have named it then. I keep coming back to that. I'm a social worker. I've sat across the table from dozens of women who have told me exactly this story, and I still managed to convince myself, for a while at least, that it was fine, that Bridget was fine, that marriages have adjustment periods, and I was projecting because of the work I'd done and the things I'd seen. We see what we're willing to see, even the people who should know better. The moment I stopped being willing to look away happened on a Saturday in February. My husband and I had driven out to their condo for dinner. My son-in-law had suggested it, which I found out later was part of a pattern of keeping Bridget in controlled environments rather than letting her come to us. His mother was visiting from Calgary. She'd been staying with them for 10 days, which already told me something, but again, family visits, normal things. I brought wine. My husband brought those chocolate-dipped shortbread cookies that Bridget has loved since childhood. He makes them himself every Christmas, and she always says they're the best thing she eats all year. He'd made a special batch. He carried them in a tin. We sat down to dinner. Bridget had spent most of the day cooking, I could tell. The table was set carefully, everything neat, the kind of careful that comes from anxiety rather than pleasure. She'd made a mushroom risotto, which is a labor-intensive dish that takes real attention and patience to get right. It was good. It was genuinely good. His mother, I won't use her name. I'll just call her what she was to Bridget, which is the woman who was supposed to welcome her into a family, took a few bites and then set down her fork with a small, deliberate sound. She said, "It's a bit heavy, isn't it, for a February dinner?" You'd think with all her time she might have learned something lighter. The she was Bridget. She was sitting right there. I put down my own fork. I looked at my son-in-law. He smiled, the same pleasant, warm, measured smile I had seen on his face for 3 years, and he said to Bridget, "She has a point, love. "We've talked about this," he said it gently, like a correction you offer a child who keeps making the same small mistake. Bridget looked at her plate. I watched my daughter, who had a master's degree and 11 years of professional experience, and who had once, at 17, stood up in front of her entire school board and argued for changes to the special education curriculum, and I watched her nod. I watched her say, "You're right. I'll try something else next time." Something shifted in me. Something that had been slowly tightening for the better part of a year. I said pleasantly, "I think the risotto is wonderful, Bridget." I said it clearly, to her, directly. There was a pause. My son-in-law looked at me. His expression didn't change exactly, but something behind it did. Later that evening, when my husband and I were putting on our coats to leave, Theo walked us to the door and he put his hand on my arm, lightly, briefly, and he said, with that smile still on, "She's very sensitive to criticism. We're working on it." As if Bridget were a project, as if he were doing the good work of improving her. I said good night. I hugged my daughter for slightly longer than usual. I felt her hold on a moment longer than she needed to. In the car, my husband said, "Are you okay?" I said, "Not entirely." I didn't sleep much that night. Over the next 3 weeks, I started paying a different kind of attention. The social worker kind. I went back over conversations in my mind. I thought about the chronology of small changes in Bridget. I called her more, and I listened differently, not just to what she said, but to the pauses, to the way her voice went slightly careful when she mentioned him. Once, she said, "I've been thinking I might leave the nonprofit. Theo thinks I'm undervaluing myself there," and there was something about the phrase "Theo thinks" that sat in my chest like a stone. I also started being very, very still about it. If I pushed too hard, she'd protect him. I'd seen it 100 times. The last thing you do when you suspect someone is in this situation is to go in with accusations, because they will close around the person you're trying to reach them about like a fist closing around something precious. So I waited. Then came the birthday dinner. It was my husband's 65th birthday in March. He wanted something simple. Dinner at our house, immediate family only, his sister and her husband driving up from Hamilton, Bridget and Theo. No fuss. He made that very clear. No fuss. Just the people he loved around a table. Bridget and Theo arrived late. Not terribly late. 20 minutes. But late enough that the appetizers had already been passed around, and my husband's sister had poured herself a second glass of wine. Bridget came in looking tired in a way that she tried to cover. Slightly too much makeup, slightly too bright a smile. She hugged her father for a long time. Theo shook hands with everyone and helped himself immediately to the wine. Dinner was going well, genuinely well, the kind of dinner where the conversation keeps finding its own current, where you forget to look at the time. Bridget was more herself. She laughed twice, real laughs, thrown back head laughs, and both times I felt something loosen in my chest. Then my husband's sister mentioned that Bridget's old friend, a woman she'd known since university, had just had twins. She'd seen it on social media. Bridget lit up. She said, "Oh, I know. She texted me last week. I've been meaning to call her. I want to go visit once they're home from the hospital." And Theo said, still at the table between bites of food, completely casually, "You haven't mentioned that, not a question." Bridget said, "I must have forgotten. I only heard last week." "You've been on your phone plenty," he said. Still calm. Still almost conversational. "You just didn't mention it to me." The table had gone quiet in that specific way. Tables go quiet when everyone understands something is happening, but no one wants to be the one to acknowledge it. Bridget's voice went careful. "Theo, it's Dad's birthday. I'm just pointing out," he said, "that we're supposed to be partners. That means communication. I don't think that's an unreasonable expectation." My husband's sister looked at her plate. Her husband looked at the window. My husband's hand tightened slightly around his fork, and then Bridget said quietly, "You're right. I'm sorry." I excused myself from the table. I went to the kitchen. I stood at the counter for about 45 seconds. I wasn't panicking. I want to be clear about that. I wasn't panicking. I wasn't spiraling. I wasn't even, in that moment, particularly emotional. What I was certain. Certain in the way you are when all the evidence has finally arranged itself into a shape that you can't keep calling ambiguous. I picked up my phone. There are people you know in this work, after 31 years. There are colleagues, former colleagues, supervisors, caseworkers, people you've referred clients to, people who have referred clients to you. There are people whose job it is to help. I had kept those numbers, and I knew which one to call. She answered on the third ring. She was a woman I'd worked with 12 years earlier, a domestic violence advocate who had since moved into direct intervention and counseling services. Her organization worked specifically with adult women in coercive control situations. She was thoughtful, experienced, and she had once told me that the hardest cases, the ones that took the longest to unravel, were always the ones where the woman was isolated before she even knew it was happening. I spoke quietly. I said, "I think my daughter might need your help. I don't want to push her before she's ready. Can you tell me what I should be doing right now?" She talked me through it. She told me what to watch for, what to document, and, most importantly, how to stay close without making Bridget feel like she needed to choose. I went back to the table. I sat down. I said, to the table generally, but to my husband specifically, "I think we should open the good scotch tonight. It's a special birthday." And the conversation moved again. And Theo smoothed his expression back into pleasantness, and we finished the meal. But I had made the call. Over the following months, things moved slowly, and then all at once, the way these things always do. I did not confront Theo. I did not issue ultimatums. I did not tell Bridget what I thought she should do. I showed up. I called. I kept every channel open between us that I possibly could. My contact sent me resources, not as pressure but as information that I passed along gently over time, in ways that left the door open without demanding she walk through it. What changed things was a Tuesday morning in April. Bridget called me and she was crying. Not the kind of crying that apologizes for itself, but the older, rawer kind, the crying that's been waiting, and she said, "Mom, I don't know how this happened. I don't know who I am in this anymore." I said, "I know, and it is not your fault. And I need you to know that there are people who can help, and I have already been talking to one of them, and whenever you are ready, I am right here." She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I think I'm ready." What came after was not simple, and it was not fast. These things never are. There was a period of Bridget staying with us, which meant logistics and paperwork, and navigating what her rights were under Ontario's Family Law Act. And there were difficult conversations with a family lawyer and a financial advisor about what the separation would mean practically. They had joint accounts. They had the condo. There was a car registered in both their names. There were 3 years of shared finances to untangle. And Bridget had stopped contributing as much to her own RRSP because Theo had suggested it made more sense for him to manage their retirement savings together, which is a thing some abusers do to create financial dependence. All of that needed to be dealt with, carefully, and with proper legal guidance. There were hard days. There were days Bridget second-guessed herself, which is normal and human, and part of what happens when someone has spent years being told their perceptions are unreliable. But she had a good lawyer. She had my contact at the advocacy organization. She had her father, who drove her to appointments and never once made her feel like a burden. And she had me. The separation was finalized 11 months later. The condo was sold. The assets were divided in a way that her lawyer fought for, and that Theo's team did not fight as hard against as they might have, because by that point certain things had been documented. Emails. A log Bridget had kept at her advocate's suggestion of incidents with dates and times. A recording, legal in Ontario under the one-party consent provisions, of a phone call during which Theo said several things that his lawyers presumably advised him not to repeat. He did not contest the final terms. His mother called me once during this period. She called my cell number, which I don't know how she got. She told me I had destroyed her son's marriage. She said it with a coldness that I recognized, the same coldness under the warmth I'd been watching for 3 years, finally out in the open. I said, I helped my daughter find her way back to herself. I hope one day you understand that that's what happened. I hung up. Bridget is 32 now. She's back at work. She went back to the non-profit, actually, and they welcomed her. She runs in the mornings along the waterfront trail, which she started doing during the separation, and kept up because she said it was the first time in years she'd had an hour that was entirely hers. She's in therapy, which she started during all of this, and which she says is the most useful thing she's done for herself in a long time. She texts me photos of things she cooks, elaborate things, new recipes, things she finds interesting, and she doesn't apologize for any of them. A few months ago, she made mushroom risotto and sent me a photo of the pot. The caption just said, "Still makes it heavy." I laughed until I cried. I want to say one thing to any mother who is watching this and recognizing something in what I've described. Something small that you told yourself was nothing. A change in the way your child moves through a room, a hesitation before they speak, a laughter that doesn't reach the same place it used to. You are not overreacting. You are not projecting. The instinct that something is wrong is almost always responding to something that is actually wrong. 31 years of that work, and the most important thing I ever did was stay close. Not push, not demand, not make her choose before she was ready. Just stay close, keep the channel open, let her know that whenever she was ready, I was there. And when the moment came, I knew exactly who to call. What I want to know from you is this. Has a story like this ever touched your life or someone you love? And what part of the country are you watching from tonight? Let me know in the comments. I read every single one.